Hey everybody, it's Lavender Town, and I hope you're somewhere cozy and safe because today I am reading Charles Bonnet Syndrome, a creepypasta by S.P. Hickey. I hope you enjoy. I suffer from a condition called Charles Bonnet Syndrome, or visual release hallucinations if you want to get more technical. It's a condition that's far more common than you might realize. It's estimated that as many as half the people with gradual loss of vision will experience one or more bouts of over their lifetime. Yet I'm willing to bet that most of you have never even heard of it. The reason for that is because most sufferers are scared to tell anybody about what we experience. I know I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Andrew and I'm 26. 2 years ago, I woke up with awful blurred vision, every single edge and detail clouded as if somebody had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. It never got better. I was scared then and got over to Dr. Harper's surgery as fast as I could, suddenly needing to take a cab rather than climb into the car I'd driven without incident ever since I bought it 3 years prior. The doctor did some tests, asked me some questions. Have you been much thirstier lately? How often do you urinate? How would you describe your tiredness levels? And then gave me the diagnosis that changed my life forever. Diabetes, type 1. He explained that I would need to take insulin shots with every meal, that eating the wrong foods without monitoring my blood sugar could see me drop into a coma, or worse. Then he got to my eyes. Andrew, your diabetes has resulted in maculopathy. Do you know what that is? I shook my head dumbly, already reeling from the shock of my diagnosis, and Dr. Harper went on. It's when the diabetes affects the blood vessels at the back of your eye, blocking them and causing them to leak into the macula, the central part of your retina, that helps you perceive color and fine detail. When these blood vessels leak into the macula, it can cause significant damage. With a lump in my throat, I asked, "Okay, so how do we make this better?" I couldn't see Harper's face properly when he spoke, but his tone of voice was enough to tell me what I had been dreading. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he replied gravely. "Perhaps if we'd caught this a little sooner, we might have had some treatment options available to us, but I'm afraid the damage has been done. We can take steps to arrest the development of the condition, but I'm afraid it's irreversible." I felt as if my world had come crashing down around me. I was just 24, still at my physical peak. I was active, playing basketball and cycling a couple of times a week, and now my health, my body, and my sight had been taken from me. The first 6 months were rough. I broke up with my girlfriend, a sweet girl called Holly, who tried to make it work but couldn't because I was so angry all of the time. I lost my job because if there's one thing an architect needs, it's his eyes. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, making excuses not to meet with them until they stopped asking. In truth, it was jealousy on my part, envy that they got to keep on living while everything I'd ever hoped for had been snatched away. I became a recluse, never leaving my apartment, barely bothering to wash, shave, or get dressed each day. I was so sure that my life was over, I stopped even trying to live it. I was a jerk. It took a long time for me to realize this, but in the end, it was the nurse assigned to visit me at home, a tall, no-nonsense, experienced woman called Lois, who brought this to my attention. "You're a jerk," she said. "What?" "So you've got diabetes. Do you know how many people do?" she asked. Then, before waiting for my answer, she continued, "Do you think they hide in their apartments, refusing to get on with their lives? Losing your vision is a terrible thing, and you do have my sympathy, but Andrew, it's no excuse to give up." "But you don't," I argued, trying to defend myself, but she hadn't finished. "Understand?" she growled. "One of the bravest men I know was paralyzed from the neck down when he was just a child, and he hasn't given up. You can do so much more with your life, and you have people who want to help you do that, but you can't even bother to shave that ugly beard off. Stop being a crybaby and make a difference." Of course, it didn't happen overnight, and I argued with her. I was furious at her blunt insensitivity and told her to leave. I said I'd tell her superiors, but she just laughed and told me I wouldn't. "You won't because you're a smart guy and you got too much pride for that," she said. "I'll see you next week." That night, I shaved. I opened my curtains and actually looked around. Things were blurry, but when I really looked, I could see that things were scattered around my home, the mess I'd let it become. When Lois came back the following week, the place was tidy. I was clean-shaven, dressed. I'd even attempted to comb my hair. She didn't say anything about it, didn't mention the argument the week before, but she took me out for coffee down the street. She guided me along the sidewalk to the coffee shop, talking to me, reassuring me. It was daunting, even though it was less than a block away, but I felt so proud when I got there. We talked, me and Lois. I think I even laughed. Afterwards, she walked me home. Then, when she helped me back inside, she said, "It's nice to meet you at last, Andrew." That day was the beginning of my new life. I moved to a new apartment, a ground floor place, and joined a group of other young people with visual impairment. I made friends. I got out every day, even if it was just a short walk, but I made a point of seeing what I could of the world. I bought what I could, but the Sawyers, the old couple that ran the local store, would bring by my groceries once a week. Clark's an old, gruff man, but he refuses to coddle me, and he told me that he respects me for being like I am, for maintaining my independence, for not giving up. From a guy like him, that's one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. Things were going so well, and then, 1 year ago, it started. I walked into my living room, a mug of coffee in my hand, and I saw a Victorian funeral carriage stood right there on my rug, complete with 2 huge proud horses in full livery, adorned with long black plumes in their bridles. They stood perfectly still while the driver, a small bearded man in a period costume and a top hat, fidgeted with the reins and peered at me expectantly. Bizarrely, they were far clearer than the usual blurry shapes I could see. I damn near peed my pants. I dropped the cup, spilling scalding hot coffee all over my bare feet, jumping backwards with a cry of pain and alarm. When I returned my attention to the horses and the carriage back in the room, they were gone. At that moment, I wondered if I was going crazy. Apparently, most of us do, which is understandable. After much quiet swearing to myself and more than a little self-delusion, I managed to convince myself that I had not seen what I thought I had, and that it was merely a very vivid daydream. This seemed to work, and I got on with living, even if I entered the same room a little more consciously in the days that followed. Finally, I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I saw a giant, floating, swirling orange ball in my bathroom. I stood staring at it, this bizarre, rotating, levitating globe that was a little larger than a beach ball, hanging in mid-air over my tub, open-mouthed for a full 10 seconds, before finally screwing my eyelids tightly closed and whispering to myself, "That isn't there. That isn't there." After 5 seconds, I opened my eyes again, and it wasn't there. Have you ever had cause to doubt your own sanity? To wonder whether what you perceive is truly there, or if your mind has betrayed you? Honestly, compared to the loss of my vision, the prospect of losing my wits was so much more terrifying. I'd fought against adversity and took pride in the fact that I am not just a survivor, but someone who is living his own life. How could I do that if I was insane? I barely slept that night and remained jumpy for days afterwards. Any sign of movement or any unfamiliar shape would set my pulse racing, would cause me to doubt whether it was really truly there. It was the toughest time I'd ever been through, worse even than that time after I was diagnosed with diabetes. At least when Dr. Harper had told me about the diabetes, I had a definitive prognosis. I was given facts by a medical professional. My affliction was physical, it had a name, and most important, it had a treatment plan. This was something else. My own mind had turned against me. My senses and my perception of reality had become twisted and unreliable. It's only when you're in that position that you realize just how terrifying it is. Your senses and the way in which your brain interprets them are your only true defenses against danger. You perceive danger and you avoid it, preventing your body from becoming harmed. But what happens when you can't trust your perception to alert you to dangers that are truly there? Lois picked up the problem first, noticing my skittish manner. She asked what was wrong, if I needed to talk about anything, but I told her no, I was fine, but I hadn't been sleeping well. The last part was true. I hadn't been able to sleep a wink. Just the thought of being institutionalized, spending the rest of my days a sedated, blue pajamas-clad zombie in a white room with only the echoing cries of my fellow inmates for company, terrified me beyond measure. But what was the alternative? Live life as a risk to myself and others? Ultimately, I chose to ignore it. I reasoned that if I was able to function around other people without them realizing what was going on, that was good enough. A full month passed before the next incident, and I really did think that maybe I'd put this whole mess behind me. With every passing day, my confidence had grown, so that Wednesday morning when I stepped out onto the sunny street, I was feeling pretty carefree. Each Wednesday, I'd treat myself to a latte down at Joe's, the same coffee shop that I'd visited with Lois. It was a custom that gave me a great deal of pleasure, one that had seen me forge friendships with other regulars as well as the staff, including Joe himself. As I made my way down the street, white stick in hand, I glanced about me, taking in the colors and the shapes of the world around me. I enjoyed the feel of the sun on my face and the sounds of the birds singing. It was a good day. Then I saw them. A party of pilgrims, 6 of them, all dressed in settler-era attire, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt. They didn't look at me. Instead, they were engaged in heated yet strangely silent conversation. I froze, staring at them. Still they argued, gesticulating furiously at one another. However, I couldn't hear their angry voices despite the fact that, judging by their ill temperament, they must have been screaming at one another. Paralyzed by shock, the white stick fell from my numb fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk. I turned to leave, desperate to flee from the haunting sight of the colonists in the road, but I was so panicked, in such a hurry, that I stepped on my cane. It rolled underfoot, and before I knew it, I pitched over, tumbling to the hard ground below. I didn't quite break my fall in time, banging my cheek hard on the floor and skinning my palms. I heard a cry from a passerby, a friendly, concerned woman who rushed to my side. She knelt beside me, helping me up, applying a Kleenex to my throbbing cheek, which she informed me was now bleeding. I tried to tell her that I was okay, there was nothing to worry about, but this good Samaritan insisted on driving me to Dr. Harper's office to get my injuries looked at. Now that I think back to it, I'm pretty sure she knew my obvious distress was nothing to do with the fall. At the time I was embarrassed and angry, but now I realize I owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her intervention, I don't know how much longer this would have gone on before I cracked up and ended up in an asylum after breaking down through sheer stress. "Andrew, why don't you tell me what happened?" Dr. Harper asked, gently dabbing at my cheek with disinfectant. I explained that I had just lost my balance and that no harm was done, but I think that he saw through my feeble protests to my underlying agitation. He didn't press or force the matter. He simply asked what might have caused my clumsiness. Then he asked how I'd been as of late. When I finished mumbling my way through the most non-committal answer I could muster, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Andrew," he repeated gently, "why don't you tell me what happened?" I burst into tears. I told him how scared I was, how I'd fought so hard for my independence and now I knew it was going to be taken from me. He listened patiently and then asked me to tell him why I thought that. I paused then, took a deep breath, and thought about it. This was the point of no return. But really, what other option did I have? So with tears running down my cheeks, I told Dr. Harper everything. I told him about the horse in the carriage, the orange globe, and the pilgrims. I told him how I'd been living each day in fear, how I was terrified I was losing my mind. Dr. Harper thought for a while, and then he said, "Andrew, I don't think you are losing your mind." The sense of relief I had at that moment was so powerful it overwhelmed me, rendering me speechless. "You say that even though you've seen these things, you've never heard any noise from them? Have you detected any odors or experienced any other physical sensations, such as touching them?" I shook my head no, and he patted my shoulder once again. "Andrew, have you heard of Charles Bonnet syndrome?" he asked. "Charles... who?" I asked, confused by this sudden, unexpected turn of conversation. "Okay, let me explain," Dr. Harper said kindly. Charles Bonnet was a Swiss naturalist who was born in the 1700s. He discovered a curious condition in his elderly grandfather, who was nearly completely blind due to cataracts. The old man had regularly experienced visual hallucinations, including random patterns and even people and places. Sound familiar? "Yes," I replied, still confused. "Am I suffering from dementia?" "No, Andrew, not at all," Dr. Harper reassured me. "Do you know how perception works? In layman's terms, your eyes take in light via the iris and pupil, which is then processed via the retina and translated into electrical signals which are decoded by the brain, which simply organizes these signals into a recognizable image. With me so far?" I nodded, finally starting to understand. When the retina becomes damaged, such as those who have undergone macular degeneration, those signals become warped and jumbled, Dr. Harper went on. The brain still receives them, so it does its job, translating these distorted signals into an image. It kind of fills in the gaps for you. Sometimes it fills in these gaps with colors, patterns, creatures, and places that aren't present. And this is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. I nearly wept with relief. "So I'm not crazy?" I cried. "Not at all," the doctor replied. "This is an entirely physical condition. Your mind is in full working order. If you were suffering any form of mental illness, your delusions wouldn't be limited to just one sense. You'd hear these interlopers, smell them, even feel them. This is a condition solely related to your eyes, not your brain." As I left Dr. Harper's office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Sure, my vision was still an issue, but now I knew it was only a problem with my eyes, not my mind, and I knew I could handle the situation. I was ready to face the world again. Since then, I've seen plenty of weird visions. I saw a huge waterfall in the park, complete with a hazy mist and butterflies flitting about it. I saw a Native American warrior, complete with a huge feather headdress, sitting at a stool in the counter of a coffee shop. I saw an intricate and quite impossible structure of scaffolding crisscrossing the entire front of my apartment block. Hell, on 4th of July last year, I even saw a great swooping green dragon in the sky, twisting and cavorting through the air overhead. All looked utterly and completely real, yet now I knew they were simply tricks of the eye. They were no longer disturbing. In fact, I actually came to quite enjoy them, even looking at them as unique and entertaining little shows or works of art that existed purely for my pleasure and no one else's. I came to welcome them. Then, a month ago, I saw her. It was nighttime. It's always nighttime when I see her, and I was just getting ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to get myself a glass of water and actually cried out in alarm when I spotted the figure in the corner. She was tall, by far the tallest woman I'd ever seen, and even though she stood hunched, she still had at least 6 inches on me. I was used to seeing characters in dated and bizarre dress, but this was different somehow. It didn't seem like any outfit from any one time, instead a bizarre mishmash of items. She wore a tuxedo jacket, figure-hugging in black, tailored to the female body shape, over a dirty old ruffled dress shirt. To complete the ensemble, she wore a bright red bow tie. On her hands, which she held out to either side as if shrugging or maybe feeling for rain, she wore dirty white gloves. Her fingers were disproportionately long, almost spidery, and occasionally they twitched, as if she longed to grip something in them. On her lower half, she wore shorts the same crimson as her bow tie, over opaque black nylons. Her legs were long, attractive if truth be told, the legs of a dancer. She also wore red heels, the same hue as her shorts and bow tie, but they sparkled and shimmered, bringing to mind Judy Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. As strange as this ensemble was, I couldn't tear my eyes away from her face. Most of it was obscured by a jaunty bowler hat, tipped and tilted to hide her eyes and nose, but beneath the brim of the hat I could see the deathly pale skin of her face, and a grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was wide, with entirely too many teeth. A smile is meant to be an expression of warmth. It's meant to feel welcoming and benevolent. But the look on this woman's face oozed malice. It felt like the sort of glee I'd expect from a snake as it corners a rat. However, the thing that startled me the most was that she had a third arm sprouting from her back, curled up and over her head like a scorpion's tail. It was longer than any arm should be, and the hand only had 3 fingers like a claw. It was pointed straight at me, and I swore in dismay and stumbled sideways. It seemed to track my movement. I stood staring at that creepy figure for a few seconds, trying to get my head around the situation. She just stood there in the corner, grinning back. Finally, I realized this was just another of my hallucinations and breathed an audible sigh of relief. One of the tricks I picked up over the months of suffering from Charles Bonnet syndrome is to break the line of vision towards whichever stimulus is causing my brain to interpret the image that I'm seeing. Think of it like restarting a faulty computer, how refreshing the system debugs it. To this end, I close my eyes and count to 5. Then when I reopen them, the hallucination is gone. So, as I stared at the horrifying, malformed figure in my kitchen, I knew to make the image go away, I simply had to close my eyes. I'll be honest here, when I counted to 5, I hesitated a little before opening them again. If I'd opened my eyes and she'd still stood there, smiling that wicked smile at me, I think I might have had a heart attack. But she wasn't, and I breathed another long sigh of relief, fetched my glass of water, and went to bed. The tall woman haunted my thoughts in the days after I saw her. She was different from the other visions I'd had. Somehow she felt more real. It was this agitation that my buddy Jason picked up on when we met for lunch the following Friday. Jason was one of those same friends I'd tried to drive away shortly after I lost my vision, yet he'd refused to give up on me, continuing to get in touch week after week. "You've got to tell me what's going on, dude," he said as we sat down over pizza. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to brush it off. "You're so distracted, it's like you're looking for something in here all the time. You've eaten like 1 slice of pizza in the time it's taken me to eat 4. So I repeat, you gotta tell me what's going on," Jason said, waving a slice of pizza around for emphasis. "It's nothing," I replied, feeling a little stupid. "I just had a hallucination a couple nights ago that really got to me." "I thought you were cool with those now," he asked, putting the pizza slice down. "Yeah, I am. I mean, I was, but this was different," I replied, resigned to talking about it. "She scared me." "She?" Jason said, his interest clearly piqued. "Tell me about it." And so I did. I described the tall woman and how she'd appeared to me. I explained that unlike any of my other hallucinations, she felt more real, and that she was the first to feature such a weird and unsettling mutation. Sure, I'd seen smaller versions of people in the past, but the extra appendage and the impossibly distorted face were something I had yet to encounter thus far. I think it was that, combined with the unnerving, expectant stance, that disturbed me the most. "So," Jason said after I finished, "you said she had great legs?" "Shut up, you jerk," I laughed, throwing my napkin at him. No, seriously, I get it, man, Jason replied, passing the napkin back to me. If I walked into a room and a giant mutant was waiting for me, it'd scare the crap out of me too. But you know what caused you to see this. It's like the coachman and the waterfall you saw. It's a condition that you know you have, and it's one that you know how to deal with. I know, I replied. Thanks, man, you're right. I did feel better too, so I smiled at him, took a big bite of my pizza, then changed the subject, asking him about his ex, a conversation he was all too happy to dive into. The next time I saw the tall woman was just under a week later. I was brushing my teeth. I stood at the wash basin, brushing away, when I spotted a figure in the mirror. She was out in the dark hallway, peeking around the door behind me. That same sinister grin I'd seen stretched across her narrow face into a distorted grimace. The dirty bowler hat was pushed down over her eyes once again. Each of those 3 long spidery hands gripped the door frame. As crazy as this sounds, I felt like she was trying to avoid being spotted. I cried out, my toothbrush clattering into the basin. I spun around, my heart beating in my chest, my breathing ragged in my throat. She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. The doorway was empty. I tiptoed forward hesitantly, trying to look around the doorframe into the hallway without actually sticking my neck out into its shadowy confines. The seconds ticked by as I drew closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, so finally, with a whisper of self-affirmation, I stepped out of the bathroom. The hallway was empty, as was the rest of the apartment. I was shaken again. This was the first time I'd seen a hallucination in a reflection, and I wasn't even sure that I'd really seen it. A couple of days passed without incident. The night that changed the way I viewed the tall woman, last night, I had been out and had a couple of drinks. I'd met the other guys with visual impairment for dinner, and we'd end up at a bar afterwards. I wasn't hammered, but we got through plenty of beer between us, and by the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt decidedly lightheaded. It took me a while to make it home, laughing and talking to a couple of the other guys from our group as we strolled along. It had been a great evening. It's probably the last truly good one I'll ever have. I bid the other guys goodnight and, fumbling with my key, let myself in. With swaying steps, I strolled into my hallway, slamming the door a little too loudly behind me. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, and then hit the light switch. She was waiting for me at the end of the hallway, all 3 hands held aloft into claws, reaching for me, the same maddening, malevolent grin on her pale face. I swore again, louder than ever, actually jumping back a step, recoiling from the impossible tall and terrifying figure lying in wait in my own home. The tall woman didn't move. She just stood there, staring and smiling at me. I stared back, but I sure as hell didn't smile. Jesus Christ, I muttered under my breath. You know how you can feel a little paranoid after just a few beers? That feeling of non-specific post-alcohol dread? Imagine that combined with a giant grinning mutant woman suddenly appearing in your home. Suffice to say, it was very, very uncool. I don't need this, I sighed and closed my eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I opened my eyes, her face was just a foot from my own, grinning wider than ever. She dashed the length of the hallway and was now stood so close that her long, grasping arms were at either side of me, her fingers twitching and clawing the air around my face. I could see her chest heaving as if she was actually laughing silently at my attempts to dismiss her, as if the thought that I could ever be free of her was amusing. I screamed, a full-body shriek of terror, then actually dropped to my knees, covering my head as if to fend off an unexpected blow. It never came. Finally, I lowered my hands, gasping for breath, shaking. The hallway was empty. The tall woman was nowhere to be seen. I stayed there on my knees for a moment, gasping for breath. Then I was on my feet, and I turned and ran out of the apartment, out of the building, and into the street. I stood there shivering, terrified beyond reason, without a clue as to what I'd do next. Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a phone call. "Hey, Andy, what's up?" Jason asked. "Jason, I need you to come here," I said, sobbing. Jason didn't ask why, didn't complain. Instead, he simply replied, "I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside, and he dashed over to the steps outside my building where I was sitting, shivering. He threw his jacket around my shoulders and asked what happened, his voice filled with concern. "She's in there," I stammered. "The tall woman, she's back." Okay, he said, gently helping me to my feet. "Come on, man, let's go in there and check it out." I wish I could say that I was brave when we went inside, but I'd be lying. I cowered behind Jason, one hand on his shoulder as we made our way through my home. Of course, we didn't find a thing. We're talking about a giant mutant woman in my poky little one-bed apartment. Where the hell was she gonna hide? Finally, after we checked every single room twice, I had to admit that she was gone. I'm so sorry, man. I apologized, feeling genuinely stupid. I got scared and I'm super sorry. Hey, forget about it, buddy, Jason said. So I'm here now. Where do you keep your booze? Half a bottle of bourbon later, we were both feeling pretty talkative. She's just kind of different, I tried to explain. I get it, he said. It's like you saw something bad and you feel bad and that's bad. He didn't get it. No, she's different, I explained. I've never had a repeat hallucination before, and they've never been scary, She's not like the others. Dude, Jason said, taking another sip of bourbon, you've got like Charles Boney syndrome, and that makes you see stuff, so... He waved his hands in the air like a magician who just performed a trick. I know, I replied. No, listen, Andy, he said. It makes you see stuff. It's just your eyes, yeah? You didn't hear anything. You didn't feel anything. That's just how this stuff goes. It's your eyes, and it's scary, man, but you've been through like hell and high water in your life so far. You're tough. You're one of the toughest, bravest guys I know, and you can handle some creepy hallucination. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She is a very creepy hallucination, though, dude. He laughed too, and we both took a drink. You know what could help, he said finally, his voice thoughtful. What, drinking? I asked. No, well, yes, it does, he giggled. But I mean, like, demystifying her. You should give her a name, something stupid so she's not scary. Suddenly, something he said came back to me. How about Helen, I suggested. Helen Highwater? Awesome, he said, then he raised his glass. Here's to Helen, buddy. To Helen, I smiled and drained my glass. Jason spent the night on my sofa, mainly because he'd had too much to drink even to think about getting behind the wheel of a vehicle. But honestly, I think the reason he drank so much was so that he'd have an excuse to stay and keep an eye on me. I'm glad he did, knowing that he was there made me feel safer, and I was able to get some sleep. It gave me a sense of security to know that if the strange vision I just christened Helen was to appear again, I'd be able to call on him for support. This morning, we both needed support. It feels like a mule kicked me in the head, he groaned when I made my way into the living room. Yep, I replied, my own head thumping. Joe's? Joe's, he replied firmly and staggered to his feet. Over strong black coffee and muffins, we didn't talk much. Finally, Jason broke the silence. So, you feel cool now, he asked, his mouth full of blueberry muffin. I nodded. Yeah, I think so. Not still freaked about you-know-who, he asked. Helen? I replied with a smile. No, I don't really think I am. I reckon I can handle Helen. Good, he laughed, giving me a hearty pat on the back. That's cool, man. I bet you can. After breakfast, I said goodbye to Jason, and he climbed into his car and drove away. The day passed without incident, and when Lois stopped by this afternoon, she even commented on how upbeat I seemed. You got a lady in your life? She asked casually. I laughed at that, wondering what she'd think if she knew the truth. Yeah, I chuckled, something like that. Good for you, she sniffed. Make sure you treat her right. That tickled me even more, and I had to bite my lip. Sure, I replied, I'll do my best. Tonight, still a little wiped from the exertions of the previous evening, I decided to turn in early. I brushed my teeth, washed my hands and face, and got changed. Finally, I fetched a glass of water and walked into my bedroom. I climbed into bed and instantly felt so relaxed. Within mere seconds, I was ready for sleep. That sudden, overwhelming drowsiness that comes after you spent a whole day keeping sleep at bay. I decided that resistance was futile, and I sat up to switch off the light. I nearly didn't see her, but as I reached for the switch, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to the foot of my bed. The tall woman was crouching there, her grinning face staring at me from just beyond my feet. So many teeth. Her long, slender fingers spread out over my blankets, twitching slightly as she gripped the end of the bed. Slowly, excruciatingly so, her third misshapen arm came into view over her shoulder, joining her other hands on my bedding. I froze, utterly petrified. I was at a crossroads here, arriving at a pivotal moment that had been coming for some time. But this time I'd had enough. You don't scare me anymore, I said, my voice filled with defiance and anger. I'm not letting you do this to me. I reached across to the light switch. Good night, Helen, I said triumphantly, then flicked it, plunging the room into darkness. I laid there, a sense of tremendous pride surging through me, and I grinned to myself in my warm, comfortable bed, overjoyed at the emotional victory of overcoming my own fear. And then it happened. Something that turned my blood to ice water. Good night, Andrew. Her voice rasped from the darkness. I hope you guys enjoyed this reading and illustration of Charles Bonnet Syndrome, a Creepypasta, by S.P. Hickey. There's a link to the original story in the description. And stay safe out there, you guys. Thank you so much to my wonderful patrons, including Bella Story, Blue Boy, Calpumpone, Clockwork Construct, Dionysus Hadrilis, Dr. Casket, Elizabeth Album, Imagine Creations, JJ Jade, Joseph Copel, Justin, Carla Tapia, Katie Marigold, Kier, Kyle D. Metz, Leblubla, Midnight Doodles, Micah Dactyl, Moosadeer Rachel, Nora Cornelison, Okamore, Ollie, Rosie Warlock, Sergeant Pendulum, The Artsy Moose, Your Boy ST, and Zoe Stardust.